Hello, everybody, and welcome. I'm Al, and I hold shift. Donofrio.
And I am Andy Proper Neckrich.
It's good to see you guys. This is the Defuse. Hopefully, one of your go-to CDL post-show talk shows. Again, this is not your normal podcast. We're not going to frame up questions. We'll be kind of sitting and just talking to each other about everything that's been going on and the day. Really, when it comes down to it, we'll do Friday night recaps, Saturday night recaps, and Sunday night recaps. And who knows? Maybe if we do this well enough, maybe we'll do like a pre-show as well, like a predictions type thing. That kind of sounds like fun.
Does sound like a lot of fun. I'm not gonna lie. I mean, predictions. I'm always known for giving blasted takes. So when it comes down to the CDL, I'll make sure I'll give you
That's true.
100% of my trusted and somewhat blasted.
I don't know where the trusted word comes from. It's definitely not trusted by me. I'll say that much. Let's dig straight in. We've got four awesome matches to talk about as three of the four went to game five. Andy, I'm not going to lie to you. First and foremost, I was baffled by the things we saw early, including the starting matchup, Toronto and LA going up against each other.
That was a fantastic match to be kicking off the evening, Alan. You're not wrong. I mean, three best of fives going towards map five. That was just a fantastic showcasing for Toronto Ultra and for Los Angeles Guerrillas too. Both of these teams coming into the mix, not high expectations coming through. Probably a little bit more for Toronto than Los
Yeah.
Angeles.
Yeah, I mean, at the end of all things, their rankings across each of the modes are actually pretty even with one another. Both these teams sitting at the bottom four of the standings. But I think that, again, with LAG continuing to kind of have this revolving door of what a roster looks like, this time it's Saints in and Spart out. I was definitely expecting Toronto to come out with a fury. But like they had mentioned on the broadcast, the expectation was maybe Classic would be out. He was kind of visiting family, and apparently the Toronto staff were saying that if you're not in Toronto, you can't be scrimming with us. And Tobias or Kleenex, we thought was going to get the nod until very late into
Yeah.
the week. So this was almost one of those situations where we didn't know who was going to really be starting for who at the beginning of this matchup.
Yeah, I guess at a certain degree, if you're a Toronto fan, you're pretty happy to see Classic come into the mix because they were able to drop some pretty fantastic things along the way. I mean, when you're looking at the for the hard point of Hackney Yard to where Los Angeles got absolutely obliterated the second time they got a 100-point club themselves.
Yeah,
Classic were
right.
23 and 16, so I mean that's a great showcasing for them. And there's a lot of trust that comes in store for this entire roster with Classic playing with methods, metals, Cammy, and Vance for some weeks.
Look, my whole thing about this Toronto Ultra team since really the first weekend is who is going to help Cammy? That really is what it comes down to matchup. And the games where Metals and Classic and all the guys show up, they could beat top teams. But then we see moments like this where Classic has a really rough start to it, has a strong ending, and then kind of the inverse. Metals had a great start and then not the greatest of endings. Cammy was pretty much solid all the way through. And LAG was able to take these guys. Again, this is the first team that LAG has been able to find a major victory against since they were able to take Optic Gaming most recently, but also, of course, Seattle Surge. This is their fourth win in total, and it feels like one that Toronto definitely shouldn't have let slip.
No, I agree entirely. I mean, if you look at just like score lines alone, losing your search and destroys, that to me personally was probably
Oh,
the
yeah.
most impressive thing that I was going into this. When I was talking to you and I was talking to Visions and anybody else too, just about Toronto as a whole, their search game has been probably the most impressive out of everything. But when they came out of the gates for their respawn mode, I mean, when you're winning the domination, the scoreline was 187 to 137, which was still impressive. The utter butt slapping that they gave LAG on the Hackney Yard, 250-84, like I said earlier, that's pretty influential. But for Los Angeles Guerrillas to be able to win both search and destroy 6-3, I think that's probably the most impressive thing. And you can definitely tell that that's where they were keeping their nose to the grindstone heading into this matchup.
Now, beyond that, let's talk Saints because he's the new guy in. Spart's the guy that's out. And the question I have to kind of ask here is top six a possibility with Saints in the mix? Again, you take a look at the Los Angeles Guerrillas. You mentioned their search and destroy. It's been consistent all the way throughout the year. They're the fifth best search and destroy team, which is weird because they're dead last by a wide margin everywhere else. But the thing about it was, what was LAG missing at the beginning of the year? What were they missing after the three-man sub-in? And what were they not missing today? It was engagements and respawn prowess. And Saints looked like a maniac. He was all over the map. Yeah, sometimes maybe he wasn't pulling the best KD ratio ever, but the job that he was fulfilling was different than we've ever seen in Los Angeles really put together. Again, they're dead last in the rankings for hardpoint. They lose on an average of 34 points a map, which you sit there and say, oh, you lost by 34, not bad. But the next closest losing differential is minus 16 points. It's bad. It's been really bad for LAG. So is top 6 a possibility for this squad? I mean, have you seen enough of this Saints roster now to potentially get them beyond the halfway mark going into the late stages of this year?
Uh, a top 6 within this entire bracket that they're heading forward with themselves. I'm not gonna necessarily say so. I mean, like for Saints to come in and being able to showcase their reckoning and being able to showcase their talents, yeah, like you said, came out like a damn monsoon, and it looked fantastic along the way, pairing along with other members like Blast had a great series too. Vivid on
Vivid
on
had
that
a
Search and
great
Destroy.
series.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that arc off peak. I'll have nightmares if I was on the side of Toronto Ultra for sure. For how Vivid quite literally handed me my behind on that one. But still, when you're looking at the entirety of this team of LA Guerrillas, there's still a lot of dark spots, right? Aqua's inconsistent, definitely able to showcase their ability and search and destroy, but when we're getting
Yeah.
to those respawns and they're triple negative for quite some time, and it takes them a long time to heat up. Look, I'm not gonna lie, like no shade to Prestini, but if you're taking a longer time to heat up than Prestini, then you're definitely gonna have some problems for me.
The thing about it is this, again, this is a top 5 team in Search and Destroy. If Saints could continue to improve Los Angeles Guerrillas and their respawn, I think it's plausible that not only could they get out of the 12th, 11th spot for the playoffs, but they could potentially upset people in the future. Again, this is the hottest of takes because we've seen them play 5 maps, and
take.
one of them was pretty embarrassing. Again, they did get a 100-point clubbed on Hackney Yard, where, again, Toronto did look absolutely incredible. I mean, yeah, second time that they've been 100-point clubbed out of the 3 total we've seen it. But I don't know, man. I think that my expectations are still low, but my hopes have become incrementally higher. I mean, I think that Saints definitely was not one of the weak points in the initial couple of weeks that we saw Los Angeles play. And now that he's back into the mix, hopefully he can bring some vocal leadership to kind of make this team a little bit more better, make them better in Respawn as a whole. Let's hope that that stays the case, as again, they'll be making their way into the winners qualifier out of their group. But let's talk about another potential upset. Atlanta versus Seattle. Are you kidding me? In a million years, would you have guessed that Seattle would not just take Atlanta to a game 5, but they would take the first 2 maps? One of them was on a Desir Cave, where Atlanta has been pretty incredible at a pretty convincing total.
Yeah, I mean, for Azir Cave to be able to be brought that close, I mean, you're mostly looking at Sam Octane having their literal way across the entire map. Even the casters to literally quote Chance didn't even look at the maps heading into that entire series shift, because everybody, us included, as we were watching, it was like, yeah, Atlanta's got this 3-0 easy. It's Seattle Surge. What could they possibly bring to the table? Well, what they bring to the table is just bringing in Proto to the mix and combining with Pander being on there full time. You can tell that this team has been finding their rhythm, if you will, and being able to take it to a top contender, bring it to one of the best competitors in the CDL today of Atlanta FaZe, and forcing them to reverse sweep. Yeah, my eyes are a little more open wide to what Seattle Surge can definitely bring to the table. That match was really fun.
And the thing about this Seattle team that I'm actually enjoying, and I think the best way to characterize their performance today, was they have nothing to lose. I don't know if you actually got a chance to catch that podcast that Nameless had Octane on, but he was like, people don't want to play us because we suck. So we're just kind of going into the weekends not having anything to lose. Yeah, it's wild. So I mean, I actually like the move a lot to bring Proto into the mix. Again, even this year, he has experience with Pander when they played during the Minneapolis launch weekend at the Challenger scene under Hybrid Gaming, where they finished 4th. And that experience between them, like the polarity, the duality that they had with one another, was actually pretty strong for them. Again, this is a squad that has been very good in domination. They've been obviously atrocious in search, but they haven't been very good in hardpoint either. So for them to come out in Azir Cave, a map that, again, they are not necessarily good at, but Atlanta is incredible at, and take a 251.75, where Proto, he went nearly even with almost 3 minutes of objective time. Yeah. That right there shows me that, okay, Seattle knows what's wrong with their team and what pieces they need to be successful. Granted, again, they got beat up in the back 3 maps, with the exception of the last Search and Destroy, where there were just a couple of lapses on that St. Petro. But it's one of those things that I think that you look at what Joey Nubsy's been able to do, and I know there's been a lot of hate on Joey, but you know, regardless of what Temp has said, what people have said about what he does, he's got a mind for what his team needs. And even though the moves might not be idealistic, they're obviously the right ones so far.
Yeah, I mean, when you're looking at this just from a coach perspective for Nubsy, right? Like, you got to be thinking about this. you're not really gifted with a lot of the best tools. Throughout the beginning of the season, you have players that not necessarily having fun playing the game. Maybe there's some more team chemistry going on back there too. I don't know what their entire chemistry is like. I don't know what it was like when they were living in close quarters with one another, but still, nevertheless, when you don't have proper tools, it's kind of hard to be making a fantastic foundation and a house soon to follow. You know, you have Karma retiring, so then you got to be able to work in a lot of different aptitudes for your team to come through and be able to shine when you're subbing in and out Enable for Pander, and then you bring in Proto into the mix. It's really hard, and it's really easy too for those Reddit commenters, for those super sweaty individuals to sit there and be like, "Oh, it's a coach's problem. Of course, it's a coach's problem. He can't make it work with the team too." It almost makes me, familiar to when there was a lot of shade getting thrown towards Pac-Man with Optic Gaming. Like,
With Optic, yeah.
yeah, it's not always the coach. It's not always the coach too. The coach is only as good as the tools that they're given. If there's team chemistry problem, players aren't necessarily having a fun time playing together. You also have apathy that had a kid in the middle of a couple of home series too, to where it was hard to scrim with one of your standing SMG players. Yeah, things get a little rough.
Yeah, I would say that, again, looking at Seattle, not only did they play like they had nothing to lose, but they actually played really, really cleanly throughout a lot of these games as well. Granted that
Sure.
Atlanta was just the better team at the end of the day, which is why we saw the nearly 200 points dropped on them on the Hackney Yard domination. But it's one of those things that you take a look at what Joey's done, and I get that there's a little bit of a checkered past, right? Like Gen G perennially a top 3 team during the CWL, and then you go into World Championships, you lose to a team called Fuego Gaming where nobody had ever heard of BB Connor before, and you get top 32. Then everyone's like, oh, well, what the heck happened? And I think it's kind of the same thing here. I know on my personal power rankings earlier in the year, looking at this roster before we even saw an inch of what Modern Warfare was going to look competitively, I had Seattle as a top 5 team. I mean, these names on paper you figured would get the job done. But now Karba's retired. You mentioned apathy. He obviously has a kid, although he did play like he was on fire today. Whether
Sure
he played on fire in a good way or in a bad way, there were just a couple of moments he maybe got caught up in that fire. But it's one of those things that I think that as a coach, you can only do so much, right? And I
Yeah.
feel like for him to get all of the blame or even all of the merit, let's say Seattle turns this weekend around and actually makes a run. I don't think you can necessarily just look at being, Joey Nubsy is the guy that did anything, whether it's positive or negatively. Obviously, he's done something. And I think the moves that he's making, now we're starting to get a clear picture of what Seattle needs to kind of move forward. Speaking of things that teams need to move forward, though, how about Chicago and Florida? Talking about not only the simple fact that Pristini, again, in his second outing, had a couple of incredible moments where he was able to help Chicago hold on to this series. But on the opposite side, Awakening joins for Mox and had himself one hell of a debut.
Yeah, Awakening coming into the mix, their CDL debut, hot off the press, absolutely lives up to their name. Awakened for the entirety of this Florida Mutineers squad. I mean, again, when you're thinking about this roster as a whole, you gotta consider the factors, right? All the way back to the Atlanta homestand, to where Chicago lost to Florida Mutineers. That was still with Pristini in the mix. So there was a lot riding on this too. And you could also think about the nerves that can end up coming along through it all for Chicago, right? You've been losing to Florida Mutineers. You also have Pristini that is just coming into the mix that probably wants to beat their old team as well. So there's a lot of riding on this as far as narratives are concerned. But
Yeah,
when
for
you
sure.
have Mox going onto the bench, and then you also have Awakening coming in, there's a clean slate. Again, you're talking about a team, you're talking about a player as an individual. They want to come into this mix and they want to show them everything that they have. Awakening is one of those players, keep in mind that has been able to showcase their talents through the past 2 titles. I mean, if you look at their run, not obviously the best going through the Call of Duty World League Championship in 2019 with Team Vanity, I believe, finishing
Yeah.
25th to 32. But even playing with Six Gear at that Atlanta homestand too, where they got top 6, it was a fantastic showcase for them. Every single time that I see Awakening on the screen, they're always popping off, whether that's through OBJ or in the kill feed, running KDs, running OEs. This player is just so bright. And I think when you put that into the mix with players like Caesar Skies, it can definitely help rejuvenate that team chemistry.
On the opposite side, though, consider this. The Chicago Huntsmen are 16-5 in total series so far this year. 3 of those losses now are to the Florida Mutineers. The first one was in major surprise fashion because it took 5 maps to do it. The second one, a very tight 4-game series. And then once again here, a 5-game series. My biggest concern for the Chicago team, as they come off a very checkered past when it comes to their search and destroying their domination, is what is it exactly about this Florida Mutineers team that you look like you are not prepared at all for the search and destroying the domination? They're 1-4 on search versus Florida and 0-3 in the domination versus Florida. The only mode they've looked relatively solid against these guys is, you guessed it, the hard point where they're 4-2. And the thing about it is, it's not just they're playing the same map versus these guys every single time. The search and destroy has been played across 3 different maps in the time that they've played 5 times, and 2 different maps for the 3 times they've played on domination. And honestly, the domination score lines have not been close. This was the closest, but again, Florida was able to button it up with about 60, 70 seconds left in the game. It seems strange that we're having this kind of a conversation of a solid team in Chicago versus a team who just made a change for an amateur player. Granted, it's an incredible amateur player. I mean, not to throw anything away from what
absolutely.
Awakening was able to show, but what is it about Chicago that's keeping them away from being able to take out a team like Florida? Show. But if not, maybe we'll find a way to try to correct things in our own time, then come back and do maybe a pre-show tomorrow or something of that nature. We'll try to figure that all out. But let's just skip ahead and talk about this Florida team, because not only is it just this Florida team, it's the ability of the Florida Mutineers to scout out the talent that they exactly need, in my opinion, to fit the mold that they're trying to build. Again, Pristini, he kind of takes his own personal leave, saying, I'm not in a position mentally where I can play. What do they need? Somebody who can play aggressively and make sure they're manipulating the objective. That was Pharaoh through and through. Everyone was kind of saying that Pharaoh's a monster at this game early on in the Modern Warfare year. And now the follow-up question is Mox not being able to really hold on to the AR and then immediately swap to an SMG and find success. Who do you find? One of the best flex players in the amateur scene. Awakening is 100% that. Is Florida's scouting moves the best move so far in the CDL, in your opinion?
I would say it's probably one of the best, considering we haven't seen many other amateurs make a strong stick. I mean, the only one that really comes to mind that I would end up seeing would probably be Spart, headed towards Los Angeles Guerrillas. But when they came into the mix, it wasn't exactly a good showcasing for LAG. But there's also a lot of other factoids that come into play for Los Angeles Guerrillas and their lack of success, let's put it that way. You can't always just rely on one player coming into the works and making everything just click. The only time when I would probably see that happening would probably be Mac Melts himself.
I was about to say New York's moves.
New York subliners, yeah, that was super helpful to them. But that also kind of changed up a lot of different aspects for how that team worked. Again, just 100% playing OBJs, Mac Melts, and able to make it work too. But when you're thinking about it as a whole, for Awakening and Pharaoh to come into the mix here, for Florida Mutineers, yeah, I would say that they probably have some of the best amateur scouting coming through. And they're the ones that have been able to obviously scout through and through for what these players can bring to the table, whether it's flex or whether it's SMG presence on the field and what it could actually do for the rest of this team.
Here's the thing, though. It's one of those things. Okay, I'm just going to put everyone on the spot here. You think about Florida's moves, LAG's moves, New York's moves, but also you got to remember that London has made a lot of moves this year, and technically there has also been a small move when it comes to Chicago getting Pristini.
Sure.
And then you can make the argument that Chino getting bumped from the sub roster to OGLA.
Sure.
Has Florida done the best job? Yes or no?
Yeah, absolutely. Because I mean, they found the most value in it. Sure, if Pharaoh comes into the mix, they win a tournament. Awakening comes in, they look fantastic. They beat Chicago.
I think especially the thing that I think a lot of people will hold their reserves on is the fact that Florida did just come off of an 0-6 weekend last we saw them. But again, the problem there, and I hate to just put it out there in the spot, Mox did not have a great weekend. And you realize that, you see your gaps. And again, even in the 0-6 total, 4 of those 6 maps were tragically close, where they almost were able to pull out even a couple of those, not just maps, but potentially series beyond that. But I think that as far as scouting out amateur talent and bringing them into the mix, I obviously think that Mac has done some incredible things to get New York back on page. But when it comes to filling the gaps that they need to, Florida, I think, has done the best job so far. And I think you might be able to make some kind of an argument for London because their results lately have been solid. But I think at the end of the day, they wanted Nasty, not Shawnee, to start with. And then there was the Visha problem. So maybe there's some consideration there. Let's skip ahead and talk about what's going on with Dallas and Minnesota, the final matchup that we had. And, well, candidly, again, it was one of those that I wasn't sure what to think about because Minnesota had been a little bit wonky last couple times we've seen them, where Dallas has been nothing but lights out. That would be the case really once again, where Minnesota would have a nice solid performance on the Ramaza hardpoint, but then from there on out, the SFG line of this Dallas team is absolutely, in my opinion, the best in the league without question.
And one of the youngest too. That's the one thing that you got to look at too when you're thinking about them comparatively to other teams too. And as far as experience coming into the league, they have a lot of good veterans in Clay and C6 to teach them and show them what it takes to be a veteran team and to give a lot of pressure towards the rest of the CDL league. But when you're thinking about it as a whole and the powering up that we've been seeing through the respawns and through the search and destroys too, I would definitely end up saying that this Dallas Empire squad is probably one of the scariest teams to go up against. You bring it back a few weeks ago, you probably say the same thing about Atlanta FaZe, but they've been kind of sizzling out. Where on Dallas Empire's side, they've been doing nothing more but heating up.
And on the other side, again, you see it there on the screen, the big topic of conversation that I want to finish off with, because again, there wasn't much to talk about in terms of Dallas versus Minnesota, simply because Dallas had their way with them through the back three maps. But Shotzi, for rookie of the year, at the beginning of the year, and let's be honest, is it Illy? Is it Shotzi? Those are the only two considerations because they were the only two rookies that were kind of playing. But now you've got Mac in the mix. You've got people like Vivid who are starting to show up. You have the potential of someone like Awakening jumping in late. Is Shotzi in this current form, in this current period, top candidate for rookie of the year?
I would definitely say so. I mean, you said it yourself. They're basically going up against one of their teammates in Illy, who's also been having a pretty lights out year themselves too. But when you think about rookie of the year, it's not just like, oh, they had that one really good showcasing on Arkloff Peak, aka Vivid today. You also have to think about what they've been able to do since that launch weekend. And for Shotzi coming in and week out, you can see it on their streams too. This kid is doing nothing but just grinding ever since their transition from Halo into Call of Duty. It's been a fantastic transition for them, and they've been able to again soak up like a sponge all of that veteranship that C6 and Clay are able to give them, and that can definitely help things out too. And you're able to see it, the comfort for this youngster. It's just absolutely fantastic. I mean, bring yourself back towards that towards St. Petrograd on all three times today for them and for themselves.
Oh, yeah.
It's been fantastic to be able to see their comfort grow and being able to push the envelope that much further as far as what they can do with an SMG and when they actually feel the comfort that the ARs and other SMGs just have their back. I think that for Shotzi is absolutely in the running for rookie of the year.
For me, I think that as incredible as Shotzi has been since we moved online, again, big underline italicized for since
Sure.
we've been online, I would say still, unless Shotzi continues to perform at this level throughout the rest of the year, let's just say that Shotzi and Mac both perform at the levels that they're currently playing at for the rest of the year. Unless Dallas wins the playoffs, wins a championship, or makes it even further. I don't know. For me, it's like Mac individually has like a MVP caliber type of performance ahead of him because New York has needed Mac to play that well.
Sure.
Dallas, if Shotzi doesn't play well, and we've seen this on land. When Shotzi doesn't play well, Dallas can still win. I don't know if New York can still win if Mac doesn't carry the team to victory.
Exactly.
And in my mind, if New York continues an upward trajectory where maybe they don't go all the way, maybe they go top four, maybe Dallas goes a little bit further on but doesn't win a championship, I think there's actually more argument for Mac to be rookie of the year over someone like Shotzi. Now, I might be twisted for that, but I just think that based on what we saw from Shotzi on land before, and granted, we don't have the ability to see now Mac from what he played before land outside of when he played at Minneapolis, his ability to turn that New York team around has been more incremental than I think Shotzi has been able to because his surrounding cast is so much stronger. Marginally, mind you, again, these are two teams that have a lot of experience behind them, but in my mind, if I see New York continue on an upward trajectory where they're able to go toe-to-toe or even beat this Dallas team, I think Mac's stock is maybe a little bit higher, but I think that's a tough argument to have right now, regardless of the matter.
You're probably gonna have to wait all the way until the Paris home series to
Most
really
likely
get the answer for you. I mean, they're on opposite sides of each bracket. You got New York is in Group B, and then Dallas is going to be in Group A. But still, nevertheless, I mean, you raised some fantastic points. But again, like you said, that if Mac Melts doesn't show up, if they're unable to have that fantastic series,
New York doesn't win.
Again, they don't win. They don't win. But Shotzi, on the other hand, you even saw it within that hard point, St. Petrograd today too. Shotzi started off lights out. Although they still went, what was it, like 23 or something, 23 over 15. It was Hoop that actually was the lights out player this time
Yep.
around. So I mean, again, there are moments in time to where for Dallas that if Shotzi isn't the brightest player, which is okay coming in for your first season of the CDL, then they can still get picked up for any other member that they're supported with. But on the other hand, for New York, you just don't really see it throughout the rest of the year on New York from players like Temp or Zuma. It's just not there for me yet.
Now, as we kind of wrap things up, I will again mention you see it on our rundown over there. We will be taking viewer questions at the end of the show. The CMG Twitter account has actually posted up one Twitter response thing where you can just go to the thread, type in your questions, and you have a chance, if we select your question, to take 5 credits. 5 CMG credits for submitting a question. Okay, you take those. So make sure you take that time to get over onto Twitter, and I'll actually link that thread over for you guys on the chat so you can get there and type your questions there, and we'll kind of respond to a handful of them near the end of the show. Let's dig on, though. 4 championship teams so far in the CDL since we've seen these home series go. All 4 of them obviously making it to Saturday, but are participating here today. Out of those 4, 3 of which still in the winner's bracket, Chicago in the loser's bracket. What were your initial thoughts? Let's say a sentence or less on each of them going into not just Saturday, but what you thought from Friday going to Saturday specifically.
I think Chicago's got to really clean things up here. But on the other side, for Atlanta versus Dallas, I think that could be the deciding factor. Whoever wins that series are probably going to win the entire event.
Ooh, that's
Just
bold.
saying.
Okay.
Just
Okay.
saying.
Okay. I mean, this is again when it comes down to those teams specifically, Atlanta and Dallas. The last 3 times they've played have all been relatively close. Where Dallas actually had the edge the last time around at the Chicago home series. So, okay, I see you there. I see you making that prediction. For me, strongest team out there right now, though, I will say Dallas is looking like the strongest team. I think it's hard to make the argument against that, considering that Atlanta had to go 5 versus again, kind of question mark hanging Seattle team, and Florida, we're still kind of getting our eyes adjusted to watching Awakening play in this mix. I would say between those 2 teams, though, Dallas and Florida, they looked the strongest today, especially considering that Florida did beat a very good adversary in Chicago for now the 3rd time. But are you, like, I would say, how worried are you about Chicago not getting to Sunday as they'll go into tomorrow having to play up against a long day where they'll start off having to play Toronto, and then they'll have the loser of Florida LAG.
I'm kind of concerned. I'm very concerned. I think that Chicago, I mean, when they're in championship form and they're able to play consistently, excuse me, then you're able to see what they're able to bring to the table. I mean, but it's got to be from every single member, right? RCD's formal. Scum's got to be able to showcase their talents too. You can't go through a multitude of rounds of search and destroy, not dropping a single kill, and you cannot just get lazy throughout the domination as far as what positions you're trying to break onto each map. I think that they'll be able to take Toronto relatively easily. I think that it still has the potential to go to a map 5, but I see Chicago winning that one. But for Los Angeles Guerrillas or Florida Mutineers, whoever loses that one and whatever ends up happening through the losers bracket for Chicago, I'm very concerned that we probably won't see them into Sunday. I think that if LAG play in the form that they did today and they're able to polish things up overnight, then they could probably end up winning that. But Florida Mutineers versus Chicago will always be a concern for me. And I'm sure for them too, that it's going to be tough for them to win out that match.
Well, and the other side of things, again, if Atlanta find a way to beat Dallas, even if Chicago gets through the losers bracket, they have to play up against either Atlanta or Dallas, which is going to be terrifying in its own right. Not to mention that Toronto was not a freebie. Last they played, it went 5.
Yeah.
Careful. Careful.
It's definitely going to go to map 5 between those 2 tomorrow.
Interesting. Okay. He's stamping it. He's going to go 5.
I don't have
Biggest
any
Cinderella.
stamps, but yeah, sure.
Fair enough. Well, we talked about our favorites. Biggest Cinderella for you. If you do make that stamp, by the way, I want a copy of it because I need to get me some more stamps in my life. Biggest Cinderella so far that you've seen. Obviously, it's easy to say LAG because they're in the winner's bracket, but in my mind, that does not mean that LAG is going to make the playoffs.
I mean, so for me in my bracket, I didn't post it to Twitter. I didn't put it all the way out there, but I did pick LAG beating Toronto, regardless of how we were talking.
I definitely did.
I know. No, nobody probably did, but I
got smoked today in my predictions.
You really did. You really did. Watching all of the games today with Alan, that was a lot of fun. He was very concerned throughout every single match until we got to Dallas versus Minnesota. Anyway, but for Los Angeles Gladiators or Guerrillas, I want to honestly say that for Florida, they have a lot of plot holes, and I think that for the Guerrillas, that if they can continue to show up the way that they did today, and they're able to clean up Aqua's very very swift mistakes. I think that again it'll go to a map 5, but just go there with me, right? If the Guerrillas end up beating Florida,
I don't
yeah,
know if I can go there with you. I think you're twisted.
just saying.
I don't know, man.
Hey, we saw it from Optic, man. I mean, like it's
We
definitely
did see it
possible.
from Optic. It is possible.
Possible.
I will say again, there's not a lot of Cinderellas in this one. We've got 5 of the top
No.
5 teams in the mix of these 8, and the other 3 are near the bottom of the barrel. For me, I think Toronto has the best chance to upset. I think if Toronto can find a way to beat Chicago, they play up against LAG next. Probably, again, I've got Florida taking LAG down 3-1, maybe losing the search and destroy. But if Toronto could get past Chicago, which again is not an impossibility considering they've been to 5 before, I think
Yeah.
Toronto gets past LAG and they're in the playoffs all of a sudden. Then that's where their run stops because I don't see them beating Atlanta or Dallas. But
No.
regardless, I think that's probably the best chance at a Cinderella coming through the rest of this weekend. I don't know. Like last weekend was the weekend that I was hoping that we'd see a lot more Cinderella stories than we got this weekend. But
This
let's
is
go
not the
into
event for Cinderella story.
no, not at all. Not at all. This is literally a battle of who is actually the best. This is the weekend where power rankings become much easier because you can just take the results from last week for the bottom 6 and then the results from this week for the top 6, and you're
We
good
have
to go.
David and Goliaths, but this is literally just a battle of Goliaths.
Let's go in and take some questions here for you guys. As we were submitting them again, most of them coming through the Twitter sphere. Chriso has a good one here, and we kind of just talked about this one, but we have teams ranked 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 facing teams ranked 10, 11, and 12 this weekend. How important do you feel this weekend is for either side of the rankings coin?
I mean, honestly, when you have teams on both sides not really having anything to lose at this point and everything to gain, I think it can get certainly interesting, right? Like again, like for my take on the opposing side, if say Guerrillas end up busting out the door and they look fantastic through the rest of the series, think about all those points they can end up doing for their side of the coin, as you like to call it. But for the other side, it's just a bigger opportunity for either Dallas or Atlanta to grow that big old point lead away from either third to fourth, even fifth place, just getting further away from Florida.
The thing for me is this is a much more important weekend for the top 5 teams than it is the bottom 3. I mean, it's
Okay.
one of those things that if you can steal away 10, 20 points in the bottom, if you're one of the bottom 3 teams, you're feeling pretty darn good about the fact that you got those points in this style of a weekend where, again, this is the hardest weekend we've had so far in the CDL. So for me, it's more important for the top. I think if you're looking at this as definitely a top 3 squad, or we'll say top 4, the top 4 that, again, are the favorites coming in between Atlanta, Dallas, Chicago, and Florida. Those 4 in specific, they're sitting here treating this like world championships. This is going to feel like playoffs in your mind. You're going through essentially a tournament style. You're going to have a playoff where you're going to be facing up against at least 3 of those teams you feel, if not potentially all 4. Maybe the potentially, again, of seeing Minnesota in the mix to surprise, that would rise stock for a team like Minnesota and for Florida, I think, as well, kind of sitting as like the 4 or 5 on the outside of those core 3. This is definitely more of an important weekend for me, not just for the top 5, but the top 3 especially. I mean, imagine a world where Chicago, not only do they lose that series versus Florida, but imagine they don't get to playoffs. I think that's going to be very telling as far as what this Chicago team is lacking, even post what a lot of people are considering to be a very solid change for them.
Yeah, and then on the other side too, when you're looking at fourth place in the overall standings currently for Minnesota, this is where things can get relatively scary for them, right? I mean, like, if Florida again are able to piece together these wins, if they beat Guerrillas tomorrow, then they're able to put themselves in Sunday and say they even make it towards the grand finals again, where they're able to face off against a juggernaut of Atlanta or Dallas, things pending, which is probably the more obvious way that it's going to go. But still, when you're thinking about it as a whole, for Minnesota, sure, it could be an easy win versus Seattle. Maybe, but for Minnesota, they looked very questionable today. There's a lot of questions for Minnesota since we've hit this online stride where
they only got 10 points last week. So
exactly. So things are getting really scary for them, and I think this is a bigger opportunity, like you said, for the top 5 teams. For your Florida Mutineers, if you're a fan of Florida as a whole, to start inching their way into that top 4 area, bumping Minnesota down.
And the other question, at least that we've saw so far, this is in the chat from iHands. How far do you see Florida going in this tournament with the new edition of Awakening? We've danced around the subject a touch, but now that we've got it kind of posed for us, in my mind, taking that map 5 versus Chicago Huntsmen in round 11 is going to provide a lot of confidence. My big question going forward is I've got them getting through, like I mentioned, getting through LAG. without any concern really whatsoever. It just comes down to what can this Florida team do, I think, versus not Minnesota, pardon me, between Dallas and Atlanta, whoever they end up getting when they get through. Because for Florida, you have not been able to do anything at all versus either of those two teams. 0-6 in the map count versus Atlanta, 0-3 in the map count versus Dallas. This is one of those weekends where, yeah, you are a quote unquote homestand champion if you want to label it that, but
Sure.
who did you beat? You know what I mean? Like you get able to get through, you get able to get through one squad at the, I don't know. You're able to get through Minnesota. That's the one I'm looking for here. It's one of those things that I think that this is a very telling weekend for Florida. This is not one that you're coming into saying we need to win this, but if we can find a way to make it to playoffs and take one more map or one more match away rather and get to grand finals, you're happy with it. And that's about the extent I see in them go. I don't necessarily think they can go through each of those top 3, potentially top 4 squads, depending on where they find themselves after they get into the playoffs on Sunday.
I agree entirely. I don't necessarily see Florida doing too much. I mean, again, this is all depending on how they look versus the Guerrillas tomorrow, right? Like this for me is the definitive factor. But again, at the same point,
you've got to smoke them.
Exactly. If you don't absolutely annihilate the Guerrillas, then I don't really see you faring well against Dallas. I don't see Awakening being able to be the definitive factor to join with their other members to bring the hurt to Atlanta or Dallas, things that Mutineers were definitely be able to bring in the earlier tournaments. But sure, you're the kryptonite to Chicago, but what does that mean if you can't beat any other top team?
100%. That is 100% the follow-up that I was going to leave with, and I think that's a good point for us to wrap up on. Again, sorry for the small technical issues that we had today, friends and family, but this has been our first episode of the Defuse. We're going to be doing this on a nightly basis immediately following all of the CDL happening on the YouTube channel. So make sure you keep yourself tuned in. We hope to have everything smooth and ironed out as we get into tomorrow's recap and, of course, Sundays. So make sure you follow along. And if you're not already checking in with not only myself, but also CMG Esports on Twitter and, of course, Proper, he'll be joining me all weekend long. Make sure you take a look out for those possibility to earn free credits just by submitting a question. It's as easy as it goes. I don't even know what else I could do to give you more easy chance at credits. So
true.
Hey, and the thing is, like, you ask a good question, I'll probably read it. So that's the other side of things. So take a little bit of time to draft up a good question. You'll probably get it read. That's 5 free credits. We love that. It's $3, something like that, for a question. It's like we're giving away candy to a baby, which is actually probably not good. Babies probably shouldn't have much candy, but kids, like I don't know, small kid.
I mean, some Reese's peanut butter cups around Halloween time, where eating
we
a lot of candy.
We do love Reese's peanut butter cups.
I do love Reese's peanut butter cups. I love peanut butter in general. I could literally take a spoon inside a jar of peanut butter, and that could be my candy right there.
I'm actually gonna go make a peanut butter and jelly sandwich right now. This has convinced me.
You better toast that bread. You better toast that bread.
I will always toast the bread with strawberry jam. That's just the way you got to do it. This is so delish. I encourage you all to try. Speaking of encouraging, we encourage you guys to come back. Until the next time, though, don't fuse out. We'll be back with the Defuse next time around. So long.